Welcome to episode 5 of Hood at 50 on SRB Radio with me, the Gabby Cabby, and the Guvnor Alan Hudson, as we take a trip down memory lane almost 50 years on from Alan's debut on the 1st of February 1969 and supporting the Jeff Astle Foundation. Today we're going to be revisiting the Seattle years, from lunch at the bridge to breakfast in America. Alan, how are you, mate?
All right, mate, I'm good, yeah.
And when I say lunch at the bridge, because you were still playing at Arsenal, you were almost on the run from Terry Neal, you'd had the FA Cup final. You start the story because the connection came from a lunch at Stamford Bridge when you bumped into Bobby Moore.
Yeah, I was, as you say, I'd gone AWOL and I wasn't getting on with the manager, so I walked out. I wasn't getting paid. My missus had to go out to work to get some money. He worked in a restaurant. No, I was just getting by. And Christine Matthews at Stamford Bridge offered me, she said, we've got a spare box at the bridge. Would you like to run it? And I went, yeah, lovely, social. That's my kind of game. So I was there one day at a match and I walked out at half time and to go to the gents, and I bumped into Bobby Moore and I said, look, Bob, come in the box. And the boys I was with Dennis Waterman was in the box with me and a couple of other pals, and I said, the boys would love to see you, come in and have a beer with me. And I never thought no more of it. Anyway, he walked in after the game and he said, what are you doing? Why aren't you, you should be out there playing. He said, you're 27. He said, it's ridiculous, you just waste. And he said, and then he mentioned that Jimmy Gabriel was in the restaurant and he'd been to Seattle and I would love it in Seattle and recommended it. And that's how it all came about.
Now, Jimmy Gabriel, when we roll it back almost 50 years to today, he left his mark on you in 1969, didn't he?
He did. He went over the top to me at Southampton. I was only a kid and finding my way in the game, but I did ask him about it when I was over there, and he said he was taking on some pill or something. His missus would give him something to liven him up or something. And he said, I got you mixed up with Ronnie Harris. I said, well, Jim, I said, I don't think so. I said, I had hair down my back and Ron had short back and sides. I said, how can you get us mixed up? He said, well, that just shows you how this pill was working, But it was lovely because Jimmy, I knew Jimmy as well. We went on a trip with Chelsea and Southampton and we got together socially. So I knew him. I knew of him and I knew about him and I knew he was a real good bloke. And, I was more than happy to sign for him.
And Southampton, they were a social team, literally, wasn't they? Bill Shankly had a name for the Southampton team, didn't he?
He called them the Owl House team, didn't he? After, they had a brawl at Anfield or at Southampton. But they could drink, but they could play as well. I mean, they had some good players, at that time. I mean, I watched them play the year before at the bridge when they beat Chelsea 6 and Ron Davis and Martin Chivers and young Mike Shannon was playing. That's the kind of trio they had up front, which today would be something phenomenal, really, when you think of British players.
And this,
so they were a very, very good team, and obviously they had Jimmy in midfield. Jimmy would have played a lot more for Scotland had Jim Baxter not been playing, and also a little fella called Brian O'Neill who would kick his own granny if he had to, So they were a tough unit,
Because this is the thing, people say, well, players in the past, it was all about socialising. It was, they used to go on the Raz after the game, they'd drink before games, they'd drink after games. Back in them days, it was a totally different game. But the one thing that I've always maintained and books that I've read is that you guys, you did play hard, but you trained even harder, didn't you?
Yeah, well, that was, it becomes second nature to me. I knew I had to, I knew that my strength was all in, I didn't have it in upper body strength. Someone like Tony Curry was very strong upstairs, and we had to make the most of what we had. And my strength was in my running, really. I knew if I kept myself fit and could outrun an opponent, then the skill I had would see me through when they were tiring at the end of the game. I used to make more goals at the end of the game than I did any time. And I remember when Ericsson took over England and they was changing the team at half time, I said to someone, I said, I wouldn't have been no good playing under Ericsson because I didn't start running on till late in the game, and by that time he would have pulled me off at half time. He was changing 11 players at half time, which was quite ludicrous because some players get stronger as the game goes on.
But again,
I was certainly one of them.
With some of those friendlies, it does make a mockery of it, and also just before you left, while you was at Arsenal, people say, "Oh, Hudson, he was the one that turned down England to play against Brazil," but again, it's not as simple as that. You had a late call from Ron Greenwood. You wasn't particularly fit, and playing against one of probably the greatest team on the planet wouldn't have been ideal for you at that time, and wouldn't have been ideal for England neither, would it?
Well, I think once again, managers. Yes. The first thing I would do as a manager, I would ask the player how he was and if he was fit, and it's something that amazed me with Arsenal, really, because I didn't really have a proper medical and I was injured there. Mm. And it was so unprofessional for a big club like Arsenal. I mean, it couldn't happen today. I wouldn't have passed a fitness test with this abdominal problem I had. And in fact, they shouldn't have bought me, really, in the state that I was in. Yeah. But Stoke were desperate for the money because of the roof blowing off, and, they kind of thought, well, we're getting rid of Alan Ball, we'll bring him in, So it was a change of events which didn't really make much sense for anybody.
And you had the call on the Friday while you were out socialising, and so you had no time to even prepare for the game against Brazil as well. So in essence, there's no way that you could have actually joined up with England and made a difference for either you, Alan Hudson, or England against Brazil. It was ridiculous, and it was a late call up because somebody got injured. So you wasn't already in Greenwood's plans.
Well, it was actually a Sunday, Paul, because we played on the Saturday and at Highbury, I think, and I was in my local on the Sunday night, and obviously the squad gathers on a Sunday to play the game on a Wednesday. So I was in my local on a Sunday night, and somebody shouted out my name. You wanted on the phone? It's Ron Greenwood. I told him where to go because I thought someone was kidding me, and it was him, but. He should have asked me, really, on the phone, if I was fit and everything else. And, I mean, you don't want to pick a player who's not in the right frame of mind anyway. Yeah. But I don't really know what the situation was with Ron. But as I say, I didn't know him. So I couldn't really be... I was very, very honest and frank with him and said, with the greatest respect, I'm not in... the right frame of mind to play. I'm still carrying a bit of an injury, and I don't really want to be anyone's substitute, kind of thing, and he accepted that, and it was fine. But the terrible thing was, I see him years later at Upton Park when I used to go over there, and I went to speak to him. But he was, I think he had he was losing the plot a little bit, was sad, which was very sad. So I couldn't really put my case across to him, Mm.
Now, you're leaving Arsenal. You've had the call from Jimmy Gabriel. You're getting ready to fly out to the Great Northwest, the city that makes the Boeing aircraft. Did you have any offers from any English clubs, given the fact that you, at the time, were certainly in the top three performing midfield players, and you were only 27, so you were coming into the prime of your career?
No, I did have one. Strange, it's quite strange, really, when I left Chelsea to go to Stoke. That only one club come in for me, and when I went Stoke to Arsenal, I didn't even know I was leaving then, and Arsenal come in for me. Jimmy Robertson called me out of the blue and said you're leaving. I didn't know about that, so. And then nobody wanted me when I was leaving Arsenal, but I could quite understand that in a way, because I walked out on the club, but Arsenal were stupid really, because they would, they should have kind of let people know that there was no trouble. I weren't a troublemaker, but instead of that, they kind of let it know that I'd gone AWOL. So who's going to buy a player who walks out on a football club? No one really. But that's like when I was having trouble at Chelsea. People like Waddington can understand that.
Yeah. And
Jimmy Gabriel was in that mould. He could understand. I sat with him and I told him why I'd walked out on Arsenal, and he said, "Well, I don't blame you." Yeah. So he signed me. He was delighted with signing me. He got me for, half the money that Arsenal paid for me was cut down price. So everyone was happy, really.
And what was it like going out there? I'm guessing you didn't know much about the NASL prior. You'd seen bits, because we were all aware of how big the American scene was in the 70s, with George going out there, Pelle's out there, Cruyff. Everyone and everybody is over there in America. But what did you know about Seattle before you arrived there, Al?
I knew absolutely nothing about Seattle at that time, only what Bobby told me. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even know that Jeff Thurston. There was quite some players I knew that played over there before me, funnily enough. Jimmy Robertson, who was at Stoke with me. Tommy Baldwin had a spell there, was at Chelsea with me. But I knew nothing at all about the place. And it was quite strange, really, because I couldn't wait to get back playing. I really missed playing and keeping fit, and although I was out running every day. But then when I got there, I just fell in love with the whole city straight away. So that was quite easy to settle in.
How different was Seattle when you first arrived, by looking at your surroundings, you knew accommodation, compared to what you'd been used to at Stoke and in London as well?
Well, I found it a breath of fresh air, because it was great over there, and I can see why George went there and other players went there, because they didn't know who we were. Yeah. You have a drink in Chelsea or Stoke and it all goes back to the manager, or they can't wait to make a phone call and say you're out. But over there, they don't even know you are. Nobody takes any notice. They don't know. Soccer players, as they call them, they don't know who we were. I was a captain of Seattle and nobody knew me, so it was great. And I just used to socialise with them as if I was just one of them, really. Yeah. So it was really nice not to have to worry about going into training next day and someone to grass you up, Now,
in your brilliant book, the Working Man's Ballet, you wrote in one of your chapters that you were born to play in America, and looking at your lifestyle, reading your books, talking to you, get to knowing you, I think you were born to play there in the States. Everything that they had to offer was there for you, and it's almost as though, I know Stoke was the best time in your footballing career because you played your best football there, but at Seattle you seemed so settled and comfortable, and literally like you was born to play there.
Yeah, well, I think I was born to live life to the full, and there's no better place in the world than to do that than in America. Mm-hmm. And I just loved the city, and I loved my favourite was going away to play four games in 10 days and going on an away trip to New York and Tampa, Fort Lauderdale, Washington, playing against all the other great players. And it was basically a working man's holiday. Yeah. Only you could, I really did keep myself fit. So, and I had to be a little bit more of an example because of the way I lived, and I was the first player really to sign a long contract over there, because those were the days when people only used to go there at the end of the season on kind of a loan deal, Yeah. So I was their first long time signing, really.
And you had a nice little house. I'm guessing throughout your career you met many barmen, but you literally lived next to the barmans in Seattle, didn't you?
Yes, I went to post a letter one day, went up to see if I had any mail in my little pigeonhole, and then next door to me I see the name Barman there, and I thought, well, it was meant to be. So, and I became great friends with them. They were from California, we were from London, so we had a lot to talk about. We had parties at my house, and they were always invited, whereas in London they tried to close me down, you know.
Yeah.
They'd phone the police and say, you know, having another one of his parties, but that weren't the way in America, because America is a very social country.
Now, did you just have the one house in America? Was that the one in the hills of Bellevue?
Yes, I had that. Then I bought a smaller one in Tampa Bay, where I went down and fell in love with when I played there. And that was but that was a lot cheaper. That wasn't to live in. That was just to go down, because I just loved the place and thought it would be nice to stay there, you know, on holidays.
Now, your debut for Seattle, what was it like? Who did you play against? And was you quarter-zoned before that first game that you played there?
The first game, strangely enough, was against Tulsa. It was against Alan Hinton's team.
Okay.
He was manager of Tulsa, I believe. And I remember what they used to do in them days, because like us, they used to inject cortisone into. I still had that bad ankle, and I remember being injected, and the doctor obviously only injected me for the 90 minutes. And if you draw over there, then you play on and put to a goal scored, or you go into overtime. So quarter of an hour each way overtime. So the drug had worn off, and I was running on this ankle which had been injected, and the thing had worn off, so I was excruciating pain, and I had to walk off. So that was a bit of my first match was a little bit like the Southampton one, although losing 5-0, a bit of a disaster, because I really wanted to show my worth and didn't get the chance to.
And again, America being a hot country, I assume, because Seattle is in the northwest. It's above California, isn't it? It's, you know, almost the opposite to where you put a postage stamp. I'm guessing the ground was quite hard. How did your ankle cope with that, or did they bring in the fire brigade?
Our stadium was indoor with AstroTurf, and it had a bit of a sponge to it, so it wasn't as bad as some of the pitches over there, which were like playing on the M6.
Yeah.
And our training ground, Renton, I mean, it rained so much in Seattle, it was always wet, so that was always give that a bit of a soft touch on the surface. So I got through it all right. But I say to people quite regularly, they say, you know, you love the sun and you love being out in the sun. And I did. I said, but I was in Seattle for 4 years and we hardly got any sunshine, but I never noticed it because I was enjoying myself so much. It was such a great place to be, you know. There's so much to do, and the people were great, and I was just born to live there, you know. And that's when I started writing the book, The Working Man's Ballet. And I remember the first night, I thought, you know, this is going to be my resting place. Yeah. And I was really convinced that I would never come back. But then, just when you think you've cracked it, something happens.
Again, we'll touch upon that a little bit later in this episode, but with all chapters of your life, there's something that just goes unbelievably wrong, isn't there?
Well, yeah, I mean, I thought but this was a little bit later, you know, when I went back to Stoke, when I was offered the manager's job by the chairman there, and he died on the morning of my getting to Stoke. You know, I just don't know where I went that day. I don't know where my mind was. 1 minute I was on the train from London to Stoke thinking I was going to be the next Stoke manager. And then when I phoned the ground, as he told me to do, the girl on the reception told me he died 5 o'clock that morning or 6 o'clock that morning. So I'd have gone down the night before, I'd have probably been the manager.
It's amazing, isn't it?
So it's things, you know. I mean, we broke the record in Seattle as well. We broke the New York Cosmos record. We had a superb team. We played brilliantly that year, and but the owners, who were great people, they were the lovely Italian family, the Clucios. They just couldn't take the loss anymore. You know, I think we averaged 28,000, but for some reason they were losing money, and they couldn't take it anymore. It might have been down to health reasons or something, but it was such a shame. And then we had, you know, when you get one bad American, you get a bad American, and that's what we got, who come in and took over.
Now, you had some great times at the training ground, or before you even got there. A big box of US dollars and a goalkeeper. Talk to me about that. That was a bit of a situation, wasn't it?
Well, the terrible thing about that is I was, you know, it was before I got there, and I had three great friends there, really. One was Roy Greaves from Bolton. One was Steve Buttle. He was a great player he played at Bournemouth, and he was a terrific player. I loved playing with him. And the other was a big 6'3", 6'4", overweight Russian American goalkeeper, and called Mike Ivanhoe. And I used to get on like house on fire with him. And he was like a scout. Wherever we went over the country, he would go and find all the bars and everything else. He was like the lookout. And just before the 6 months before I got there, the story goes that he got into training, and he was out of season. He was working for his dad in the bank, and he embezzled the bank. And two of my pals, Adrian Webster and Tommy Jenkins, they got to training, and he said to them, "Do you want to train today, or do you want to go to Vegas?" So they thought he was kidding, and they said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he opened the trunk of his car, and there were like all these dollars. He embezzled the bank, and he was on his way to Vegas. So off they went. The three of them went to SeaTac Airport and flew to Vegas instead of going in the training ground. And I think that had I been there, I'd have been there with them. And I believe they went there for a long weekend and was there for about 10 days and never come out of the room.
What happened when they come back to Seattle? Didn't Jimmy Gabriel go ballistic?
Well, I think it might have been a pre-season or something. But I think Jimmy was so short of players at that time, he couldn't really do anything because he needed them. I mean, he was an unbelievable character. Ivanhoe was and I mean, I tried my hardest when I was captain and then became assistant coach. I tried my hardest. I sat him down one day. We were at my house having a drink, and I said, "Look, you've got to go on a diet, and you've got to start training better. You know, you got to lose some weight, or what? You know, you got to start playing." Because we had another fellow, a German American called Jack Brand, who was a very good goalkeeper, and I said, "Come on, give him a fight for your place, you know." But it was too much for him. He couldn't do it. He was too busy enjoying himself. So bless him. But he was a great pal of mine. But I did miss out on the Vegas trip, and I've never wished to go there with anyone else but him. So I wouldn't bother.
Now, some of the great players that you played against in America, you played against Johan Cruyff.
Well, Johan Cruyff, I've always said, is the best player I've ever played against because because of the performances he put in against, you know, when we was on the field together. Mm-hmm. You know, there's obviously George and people like that, but he just happened to be phenomenal when I played against him. And we had a fellow over there called Bogacevic who played in midfield for New York. He was a big Yugoslav, fantastic player, and I loved him. I loved playing against him as well, and you really had to be at your best to play against him. And then they had the great Giorgio Shinaglia, who was at Swansea at one time, and they kicked him out, and he went there to break all the records over there, centre forward. He was like the mafia boss over there. You know, you went up to toss up the coin before a game with Giorgio, and it was like talking to Don Corleone. It was fantastic, and he was such a gentleman, and you always know he'd score. So, they were the kind of characters out there. New York had so many players. I remember the first time I played at New York, they had you'll know this fellow, who played at Coventry, Steve Hunt.
Yeah.
Not long before he'd been in the England team, and yet he was on the bench. You couldn't even get in their team. That's how good they were. So they had players from all over the world. I couldn't name them. I think they had 3 World Cup finalists in their team when I first played there. 3 Dutch World Cup winning teams that played against West Germany.
And I'm guessing, being a massive fan of Frank Sinatra, you loved New York, and One for My Baby was...
Well, yeah. I mean, it was really New York and Chicago with Frank. It was all the piano bars in New York and the restaurants in Chicago. It was like mafia time, which are my favourite movies and my favourite music, my favourite kind of generation, if you like. I'm still reading The Godfather today. So I did love that side of it, and the characters in these places. It was terrific existence. You couldn't get in. They talk about London, the greatest city in the world, but New York was something else.
And the actual stadiums in the NASL, because they're all franchises over there, wasn't they? And you looked at that game and you thought, it's got to kick off with all these stars that are playing in America, and for some reason it didn't. And then a few years after you left, it pretty much folded, and it's the Major League Soccer now, isn't it? It is a different it's the same format, but it's a different league, isn't it?
Well, I always knew that they would come forward, because it was just a matter of allowing them kids to grow up, and there was so many British over there that their kids and grandchildren would grow up and they would have the opportunity to play, and that's all come to fruition now. It's all and there's players from all over the world, Hispanic, and so many different players. In LA you play against them, in Chicago you play against the Germans. It was just a certainty that it was going to happen one day, and that has come true now.
But going back to when you were there, was you surprised, Al, when it actually pretty much folded football there in America?
Well, I wasn't.
Yeah.
When I left, it was still going pretty strong when I left. I mean, I left in a blur, really, because I was in kind of shock. But there was still a future in the NASL. So I really, when I come back to play, and I was busy trying to get another club back here, and then I kind of forgot about it over there. And I did tell the truth, Paul. I couldn't even tell you when it folded and how it folded and why. It was just there was too many owners going over there who were pretenders, really. I think one was the geezer that used to be in charge of Portsmouth. He was one of the big owners over there. They used to make out they had all this money, and the next thing you know, they weren't paying their bills, and Tampa Bay weren't paying their bills and weren't paying the wages and things like that. So it had to come to an end. But now they're doing it on a professional basis.
Talk to me about the Waterfront Hotel. Did Pelly really catch a shark from his bedroom window?
This is what I was told.
Yeah.
Only he could do it. Well, Mike Ivanhoe could do it, I would think. But we stayed down on the Waterside Hotel when our first trip there, and it was known for Pele staying with New York Cosmos and catching a shark out the window. So you can take that as it is. There was no pictures of it.
Yeah.
But I can only say if anyone was going to catch a shark, it would be him.
And Sean Cadens said, "Hi guys, awesome to have you back on. Best regards, Al. What an era in the NASL it was in the 70s, and the goal from George Best was probably the best ever." What's your take on that, Al?
Yeah, I remember the first time I watched that,
Yeah.
and George wasn't having, they never really see the best of George Best, but they just see a sprinkle of him really there. I think he beat about 6 players inside about 10 yards and scored. I mean, they'd never see American soccer fans, even English fans. I mean, I still listen to Stoke fans saying about George scored a goal at the Victoria Ground one day where he beat 4 defenders in the round about the penalty area and 6-yard box and put it past Banks, and they'd never seen nothing like it. And that's exactly what he did at Fort Lauderdale. So there's only so many players who can do that. I suppose when you watch Messi today, when he goes on one of his little trips, he's probably one of those players, but there's not many in recent years can do that.
But the one argument that I think is absolutely rubbish, because I think Bestie actually said so himself, is the fact that people were saying, yeah, but it was only there in America and it wasn't against top class players. But even if you're scoring a goal in a playground, that is still a fantastic goal. And the thing is, in America, although there was these players that come from Britain and they played in probably the second or the third division, lots of them could have, throughout their career, had they have stayed in England, played at a higher level, couldn't they? And you played with many of them players for Seattle.
Well, absolutely, and I think Bogacivic was a great example.
Yeah.
I mean, I played against him for Red Star, Arsenal and Red Star in Singapore, and I see him play when I was at Chelsea when on tour for playing for Red Star, and he was the best player in Yugoslavia. He could have played in World Cup for Yugoslavia, but he went to New York, fell in love with New York, and he was there. So he was one of the best players I ever played against. So if he'd have played in the English league, he'd have been sensational.
And your mate Steve Buttle, I mean, he made an absolute mug of Johan Nayskins in that one game as well, didn't he?
Well, he did, yeah. We it was the first time Seattle had ever won at New York, and I remember it was my first experience of a shootout, and I scored the winning shootout goal, and that's all they're interested in America, is who scored the goals. And I remember the cameramen, they were jumping up in the air in the dressing room because they beat New York Cosmos in Giant Stadium, and the camera come over to me, and the interviewer says, "You're man of the match," and I said, "I don't think so." I said, I think he was man of the match over there. I said, do you know anything about the game? I said, what he's just done to one of the world's biggest stars. He's just had him all over the place. He stuck it through his legs. He's had him on his arm. He's had him on his knees. He's had him all over the place. He was superb. And I said, I can't accept it. You got to give it to him. And he was a really unbelievable player, because if he walked in the room, you wouldn't see him as a footballer. He had a peg. It was a little bit like George Eastham in many ways. He had a gammy leg, and you would never believe that they could put on a performance like that.
Now, how did the Americans get your style? Because, like you've just alluded to, it's all about, it's big, it's brash, it's bold, it's all about goals. But you've always been a playmaker. You're a player that made the play. I mean, in 112 games there for Seattle, you assisted 51 times, which must be up there in, almost breaking records assists.
Well, I think even indoor, I think I broke the record indoor of the amount of points, but that was a different game. But I had to try and explain to them that, if you looked at me as a soccer player, you imagine an American football player, and then you got a quarterback, someone who has to get the ball to people going forward, and that's the only way I could explain to them how to work out how I used to play, because they've never seen anything like it. Where defenders just used to hit up to the forwards because they had the 35-yard line, they could do that. Yeah. But Jimmy Gabriel said as soon as I got there that we had to play through me, so that suited me fine.
In the dressing room, Harry was there as well for a certain amount of time, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. Yeah.
How was Harry in the dressing room? Because he's always liked his horses, and he used to have a bit of a go with the young American kids and ask, tell them about horses that didn't exist that had got funny names, and they were looking through the papers trying to find them, weren't they?
Yeah, well, the American, the one thing about the American, they are a little bit naive at certain times. And I remember how we used to go racing, and they would say to Harry, because he used to take like the reserves and youth team, and the young players would say to him, "How did you get on yesterday?" And they used to take the mickey out. I think they were taking the mickey out of him, but Harry was too sharp. He was from the East End, wasn't he? And he told them 2 horses to look out for, and they looked for them every day. They said, "We keep looking for these in the Seattle Times. We keep looking for these 2 horses." One was Loose Button. He said it's got to come off, and Dusty Carpet. It said it's never been beaten. So, and these young Americans were looking in the paper every day for these 2 horses, and it was, they thought they would take in the mickey out of Harry when it was the other way round. That was the kind of banter we had in the dressing room.
Yeah.
But it was great with the American kids, because I love the American kids, and I always help them in training and used to get on great with them. So I like that side of the game as well over there.
And
they were great kids.
Sandra used to cut your hair as well for a while, didn't she, while you was out there?
Sandra, I used to go round to Harry's on a Friday night when they needed me hair cut, and he was drinking then. He'd have a Bacardi and Coke, and he'd try and force me to have a drink, and I wouldn't. Day before a game, I said, "No, Harry," and then I might just have the odd one, and that would be it. But it was very relaxed. So he showed you it was a very relaxed atmosphere there, and it was good fun. It was just a great shame that we didn't have the resources under Jimmy Gabriel to, bring some bigger players in, and therefore him and Harry got the sack. And it was sad to see them go.
And they were followed in by Alan Hinton, who took over.
Of course, yeah.
How did that change? How did the dressing room change? Obviously, then players are going to leave because they bring in their own players, and Hinton brought in quite a few Derby players, didn't he?
Well, he did. I remember I was going in the King's Road when Jimmy got the sack, and I remember my mother calling me. I was in a restaurant in the King's Road, and she told me I was heartbroken. And I phoned Jimmy up straight away and said, "I'm not coming back. If you're going, I'm going." And because he put his neck on the line for me, and he took me out of it. He said, "Alan, don't be so stupid." He says, "I know you love the place. You love playing here. You got a lovely home. You got your family enjoy it. Don't do that for me. Everything will be okay. Give Alan Hinton a chance." And it was great advice, and it shows you what a great man he was. But when Alan came in, they seemed to get out the checkbook a little bit more.
Yeah.
And Alan was, I wouldn't say more professional, but instead of where Jimmy was going back to Bournemouth and getting players from around Bournemouth and Norwich and all that, Alan Hinton was going back and seeing Brian Clough and getting players off him. And they were a couple of rungs up the ladder from what we had. Mm-hmm. And, we had people like Bruce Rioch, who was captain Scotland not long before he got there. Tommy Hutchinson from Coventry, he became a great player for us. Roger Davis, Jeff Bourne, and a great left-back called David Nish from Derby. He was a great player. And, the quality just rose, really, is all you can say. You could tell the quality, and it rubbed off in training, and that's when we went on to break all records.
And throughout your career, you always used to work with the young kids, didn't you, and pass on your advice. And even, I remember watching the Mavericks, Glenn Hoddle was talking about you, and he says, my first game for Tottenham was against Stoke. And Hud kept talking to me all through the game and encouraging me, and I scored a goal. And although he was my opponent, he almost felt as though he was on my side. And that speaks volumes of the kind of person that you are. And I think a terrible loss to football that you didn't go into management and coaching.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was one of my great regrets that I never was given a job, but that's the kind of life I've lived, I suppose. They looked at me, and I couldn't even get in interviews when I wrote into some clubs. But they probably looked at me and they thought, oh well, he's, I don't know the real reason, but I think it's their loss, and many people said to me, why didn't you go in the game? But they don't know the reason why. It's just circumstances, really.
Yeah.
Because I think I had the ability to, or I've got the ability to improve players, and especially younger players, and bring them through the right way, like Waddington used to do with at Stoke. And I remember when I left Stoke, and some players come up to me and said, I never got a chance. I said, but that's because you never had Waddington there when you was there. You've been under a bad management, and it's amazing what a good management, the difference in a Waddington to some of those that followed him. They didn't really have the best interest, and then that's what annoys me today about English clubs. They not giving English players a chance, and getting local born talent. They're still being born. You can't doubt that. But they're not interested. They'd rather go and get foreigners in and pay a lot of money for them.
Now, when you was there playing in the NASL, there was a restriction of foreign players. Could you only field 4 at any given time? How did it work, Al?
No, you had to have 4 North American-based players on the field at all times.
Yeah.
It was handy if, like with us, we had the goalkeeper, Jack Brand. He was a German-American. He was an American citizen. So that was handy. But we had 2 or 3. We had a Canadian centre-half. We had 2 Seattle-born, a kid called Mark Peterson, who was a very, very good player. Sadly died young. And a left-back called Jeff Stock. So we had a good share of decent Americans in the squad.
Now, when you're looking at the Premier League today, do you think we should adopt something like that into our game? Because our game, I wouldn't say it's been taken over by foreign players, but as you've just again alluded to, there isn't many English-born players coming through, and a boy at one of your old clubs, Loftus-Cheek, he's struggling to get through at Chelsea, although he went to the World Cup with England, and it's in time it's going to be absolutely ridiculous that you're going to get players playing for England and can't even get into the club side.
Well, I know. I mean, he's no bigger offender than Arsene Wenger. Yeah. I remember even going back 10 years ago, he had not an Englishman on the pitch and nobody on the bench.
Yeah.
And I think he was going to say, and I believe that we should have brought the system in here where each team has got to have 4 British players on the field at all times. And I think that would have remedied that. If that didn't work, then then it's back to the drawing board. But that would have helped our game no end.
I think something needs to be done to protect the game going forward, because I can just see it going from bad to worse. But again, back in America, while you was there, another player that you played with in the early 80s, Kenny Hibbitt from Wolverhampton Wanderers. Now, he was a decent player as well, wasn't he?
Well, I played against Kenny 2 or 3 times, 4 times of Chelsea and Wolves, Stoke and Wolves, and I always rated him. I thought he was a decent player, but he excelled when he come to Seattle. I don't know whether it was the environment. I don't know whether it was a more relaxed atmosphere, but he was absolutely superb. And it was a year we got to the Soccer Bowl and got beat by New York. Again, Shinagli has got the goal. But Kenny was really masterminded it in front of me, really. He was our outstanding player throughout that run to the final. He was absolutely fantastic. And when I see him these days, I remind him, and he thinks I'm blowing smoke, but I'm not. He really was fantastic for us.
Sean asks, how did you play against Dennis Stewart while he was at Cosmos? And in his opinion, he was a very, very underrated player.
No, Dennis had gone by the time I got there. I knew Dennis pretty well from his Manchester days. But he was gone, and I remember playing one night at Man City played at Stoke in FA Cup. I think it was a few days after the roof blew off, and we played Man City in the Cup at the Victoria Ground. And I remember Dennis pretty well playing that night. I think him and Mickey Paget were having a fight on the touchline. I think Dennis lost that one as well. No, I never come across him over there.
Mind you, he didn't lose the 73 FA Cup final when they beat Leeds, did he, Dennis Stewart?
No, I mean, they had a good side. Sunderland were a very good side at that time, and fair play to them. But, it's... what I loved about the American scene was... when people put them down, like you just said about, it was only against them or it was only against them, but they had players over there that were unheard of, that were absolutely outstanding. I couldn't even mention their names because I can't even remember their names. Some of them I play against and think, wow, where did he come from? And I'd ask about them. And I tell you, I played one night over there. This is against an Englishman, and we played at Vancouver, and I'd never heard of him. And Peter Beardsley absolutely tortured us. He was fantastic. And Vancouver beat us about 5-1, I think, 5-0 or something. And Beardsley just give us... And I remember going in the dressing room after and said, "Who's this fella?" And I believe he was at Carlisle or something, or somewhere up there. And said he's going to sign for Manchester United with Ron Atkinson or something. And then when I got back here, I wasn't surprised to see... how far he went in the game, because he was magnificent.
But again, this is what I'm saying. People that don't really know or have not really researched it looked at that game in America and thought, oh, it's some kind of Mickey Mouse like league. But it wasn't. It was almost like a world league, and you were pitting your wits against some of the greatest players that have ever graced a pitch there in America.
Well, it's it annoys me when people speak like that. And when I used to come back on holiday, they used to badmouth the American League, and as much as to say anyone could play over there. But I took it with a pinch of salt, because why talk about something that you haven't seen and you haven't experienced? And I don't care what you say when you've got players with that standard that I've mentioned at New York. And Chicago had a very strong team. They had some big players in their team who played for Germany, and they were good teams. There was absolutely not one easy game in the NSL. Whoever you played, wherever you went, because I had players from all over the world who were match winners.
And I don't remember Pelly, Cruyff or Kubilas ever playing in England, if I'm honest.
No, that's right. That's right. Yeah, I mean, Kubilas, for 20 minutes in Fort Lauderdale when we played there, he tortured us for about 20 minutes, and as luck would have it, we got through that 20 minutes and we went on to beat them 4-0. But you could see he was just on a different planet, So I wasn't surprised to see him this World Cup. They did a big profile on him, big project on him on TV, and it was great to know that you played against him and you could actually say, "God, he was some player." As you say, they never played over here, so and you got the English public questioning them.
I do. I think it's absolutely madness. How did the indoor league differ to the outdoor league, Al? Because you played both indoor and outdoor while you was in America, and didn't you join up with your old mate Eddie from the old Chelsea days out there as well?
Yeah, at the end of the season they have like it was called the MISL. It was a major indoor soccer league, and they kind of loan you out to them other clubs who played indoor. Down in places like Pittsburgh and Cleveland and all that, and I was going to sign for Pittsburgh when I heard that Eddie had took over at Cleveland and opted to go to play for Eddie. I phoned him up and he said, and my agent said, you won't get the same money as what you're getting at Pittsburgh. I says, no, there's some things more important than money, and Eddie McCready's one of those things, because he was a great friend of mine at Chelsea, and from a kid. So I wanted to play for him, and I did. But again, something tragic struck again. I got injured in the pre-season. Jim still tried to decapitate my right leg, Bruce Rioch style. So that kind of put that to that. But I ended up playing the last few games for Eddie. But we had a great time together.
Yeah. And the indoor, how did it differ from indoor to outdoor to people that haven't played or seen the two games?
Well, I think it complemented the outdoor game because it was great. It was, and it kept. There's no better thing, you know. In the olden days when footballers used to have 2 or 3 months off, and it was a nightmare coming back to pre-season and having to try and get fit. And we hated pre-season. But over there, that was taken care of because we played out of season indoor, and it was all sharp stuff, you know.
Yeah.
It was like 4/4 hours, and it was all on and off, and all on and off, and you know, you trained for your fitness was a totally different thing. You just played. You know, I remember Eddie McCready's sessions. So it was all sprints, you know, not long distance, which suited me.
And the same size pitch and everything else as well, wasn't it, Al?
Well, they're like. I would imagine it's the same size pitch as a hockey pitch.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was 5 a side or 6 a side, whatever.
Right. Okay.
So, but it was. I was brought up on playing 5 a side, so it was right up my street. So it suited me down to the ground.
And how long did them games go on? You're saying 4 quarters. Did it go on for an hour and a half, or was it just hour games?
No, I think it was just an hour, Paul.
Yeah, got ya. I'm with ya.
Yeah.
Oh, so that's again. It's a nice bit of, blowing out your backside, but you wouldn't want to play a full hour there without rolling on and off, would you?
Well, you couldn't. No. You couldn't possibly do it. You know, it's like when you see the ice hockey. You know, people coming off and on. You just couldn't do it. You just couldn't keep up the pace.
Fast and furious.
Yeah.
And while you was out there in Seattle, Anthony was born, wasn't he? Yeah,
my Anthony was born out there in 1981.
Yeah.
And now he's out there, you know, having a go. It's quite amazing, really, how he's done what he's done. Considering he was brought up in an American school playing American sport and didn't kick a ball till he was about 7 or 8, and now he's coach at Colorado. So it's amazing what can be done.
And you were out there recently having a look. When you roll it on, you know, many years, probably 35 years since you was there. How is the new soccer league out there? Looking back on your time, how does it differ?
It's a lot more. There's not so many English over there.
Yeah, got ya.
Which is a big difference.
Yeah.
And as I say, all them players in America are all, you know, they've come from grandparents, I suppose, and now they're fully grown men, and the Americans actually do understand what football is all about at the moment.
Yeah.
Where they didn't when we first went there. Mm-hmm. You know, they didn't understand the more subtle part of the game that I played. But now they do understand that you have to have a midfield player in there to, you know, generalise things and things like that, you know.
So it's more of an American game with foreign players coming in there, whereas the old NASL was more of a world game with the odd American player. So it's almost developed for them. Homegrown talented players and brilliant to see homegrown talented players like Anthony getting a good job there at Colorado Rapids. But he hasn't always. He's coached in England as well, hasn't he? And he certainly was manager of New Zealand's national team, wasn't he, a couple of years ago?
Well, yeah, he got one game away from getting in the World Cup with New Zealand, which was quite an achievement. Mm-hmm. With Peru, I don't know No, he wouldn't have been playing Cuba-Lissi, otherwise it would have been a bigger score. But no, he did well there. I got within one game of the World Cup, which obviously raised his profile.
Yeah.
And Colorado come in for him. But I think he's been offered a couple of jobs in England.
Mm-hmm.
Derby, I think, was one job that came in from him about 18 months ago.
Yeah.
So, I've been in touch with him since I come back, and I think he's going to further his education there for a couple of years before he thinks about getting a job over here.
But again, that's the thing, isn't it? In coaching, I know you've never been a fan of coaching, and to be fair, neither have I. But staying there, learning your trade, a little bit like a player, Al. Some players go to a club or leave the club too early. Get 100 games under your belt, learn your trade, get into the swing of things, and then move on. Because if you're going to make it, you're going to make it, and don't rush it.
Well, yeah, I mean, going in training every day, and, some players, Anthony's got a problem with a couple of players there that they just on good money, and that's all they're interested in. And we had a little bit of that. We're all different about our employment, but I just loved improving what I could improve. I could keep myself as fit as I could, and helping other players to improve. And it was always something going on in training where you try and help a youngster or whatever. And because that's the way I was brought up.
Yeah.
I would never have been a footballer if it hadn't been for things like that with my father. And picking up little bits and pieces from players that he took me to go and watch. Like the George Eastoms at Arsenal and the John Whites at Tottenham. And I love watching Venables at Chelsea. Picking little things up off them would help me later on.
Again, football is all about an education. And I don't mean sitting down in a schoolroom and writing things down, but watching players, looking at players, as you've just said, taking bits out of it and putting it into your game and improving you as a player. Well,
absolutely, mate, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, anyone that thinks they knows it all or there's no room for improvement is, that's rubbish. There's always room for improvement, whoever you are. I think Anthony's finding that out now. He's learning something every day in his coaching, and I'm giving him a few of my experiences, and he's soaking that up and putting it into practice. Yeah. Which is great. I think I said to him the other day in an email, what's the use of having all the experience if you don't use it?
Exactly.
Exactly.
And then got done by one Bruce while you was at Stoke, and then that Bruce went out there and joined you in Seattle. That must have been difficult, but knowing you as a person, you just take it on board. And where he's bragging about what he'd done to you, to the younger kids, it comes back. You hear all that, and then you got done by another Bruce who took over from the brothers, Bruce Anderson, and that was almost the end of your days, wasn't it? There at Seattle.
Well, that was. I mean, it was just ludicrous, really. They sacked Alan Hinton, and I was foolish enough to go on television and say something about the management, and they said, well, you're next. I suppose I was too loyal to Alan. But he wasn't, as I said earlier on, if you get a bad American, they can be bad, and this was one that really thought he knew about the game, and basically it was all about money. And he didn't even sit down and say, look, I'd have took a drop in wages to stay there just until he left. Yeah. But that was it. I'm one of those who really work on impulse. And my wife said, you should have stayed. A couple of people said, you should stay here. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm going to move on, Left a bad taste in my mouth. So off I came back to England.
But again, that's you throughout your career, too honest.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you give everything and to a club, and all right, people can turn around and say about my lifestyle, but if you give everything, then you expect a little bit back. Yeah. And I don't feel that I've got that at any of my clubs. I can't really say I can't run Arsenal down because, you know, they never see the best of me. But certainly did it at Stoke, and I think I did more for Stoke than what they did for me. And I think that's the bottom line, really. And I can go back there with my head held high, and not really. I don't feel welcome there, and I don't feel that I really want to go there, really, because these clubs, that's what they do. I can go to Stoke, and the fans of my day love me, and we get on great, and I feel sorry for them that they, got the owners they have now. But it's the time to change.
It's again, the one thing that I get an awful lot on the social media is Alan Hudson. He only played 2 England games. How did Hudson only play 2 England games? And the different clubs that he's had, and as he's moved on, and I'd like to think in this series of shows we've answered quite a lot of the questions in Hud at 50. And the one thing that I get from talking to you and knowing you as I do, if Tony Waddington would have had you like with Tommy Docherty, because Tommy had you at the age of 13, and Tommy said in your book, I would have played him for Chelsea age 15, but he got an injury, and then Tommy left. Now, if Waddington would have took over there at Chelsea from the dock, you would have played over 100 games for England, and I think Chelsea would have gone on and been European champions for a long time.
Well, I think the other thing about it is that George Best wanted to come to Chelsea, and I think if Waddington had been at Stoke, then he would have made that happen. Because Tony was one of those that never let a good player who wanted to come to him pass by. And George was more than that, wasn't he?
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
He would have walked to Manchester. Tony would have walked to Manchester on his gammy leg to sign George and bring him back, So, and they swear, as Dave Sexton said, look, we got enough with Hudson, Cook and Osgood and Baldwin. We don't need another one, which is very, very negative. I think if we'd have bought George, we'd have had the best forward line possibly in the world at that time, with Charlie Cook, myself, Osgood, Hutchinson and George on the left wing. With him and George crossing wings, and we'd have been, we'd have needed. They're building bigger grounds today, but we'd have needed one then.
And you'd have needed 2 balls as well.
We'd needed maybe more than that, Paul.
But finally, Al, the one thing that you did get from America, you got a golden scarf when you went back a few years ago. So talk about that. How does that happen?
They give these scarves out to every once to somebody every so often, and I didn't know I was invited over there kindly, and meet up with all my old pals over there. And I went to a game at Vancouver. There was 58,000 people in the stadium, and I was the only one that didn't know that I was going to get this gold scarf. They kept it secret. And I walked on the field with my old mate Tony Millard on one arm, and my old physio over there, Don Greer, on the other, to the right reception. 58,000 people, which was quite something. It was. And then after the game, when you left, you had the gold scarf on, and all the fans would toot in along the road and want to pick you up and take you out and celebrate and all that. It was great. It was great. It was really great fun. My mate couldn't believe it. Tony Millard, he's a very good socialiser. He's a very good spender. He said to me after 4 days, I've got the ump. So I said, what you got the ump for? He was pouring out a coffee in our room, and he said, well, I haven't bought a drink yet. I said, well, that's the way they are in America, mate. I told you, they're going to look after us, and they certainly did.
And have you been back to Seattle? Yes, you have to Colorado Rapids and not too long ago, but have they invited you back to Seattle since the Golden Scarf?
No.
Okay.
No. I think they've like most professional clubs here. I think they've they worry about what they've got today.
Yeah.
I don't blame them for that. But how things would have been different, as what we spoke about earlier on, if the change of ownership then, if Alan Hinton had stayed and I was his assistant then, and if I retired, I'd have gone into coaching there, and how things would have changed, because there's still, all these coaches are still over there.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have had to worry about coming back and starting another career on my last leg. So, you just take that on the chin. There's a lot more sob stories from footballers and sportsmen and people in every walk of life than mine. So I just try and take all the good parts out of it, really, and treasure them.
Yeah. And I think it's great that clubs, are looking after today and, the modern player and thinking about what they're going and or where they're going to. But I think that clubs should also remember the input of players of the past, because without the players of the past and without that history, then we haven't got the future. And I think it's great to remember all those players, all those memories, and every kid that puts on a pair of boots now, without them players of the past, you wouldn't be doing and you wouldn't be influenced by today's football.
Well, that's right. That's why I love writing. I'm always writing about Bobby Moore and George and, all the good, if I bump into Dennis Law, as I do every now and then, it's great to see these people, because they call them today icons and legends, but they were true icons and legends for me. And I go to Stamford Bridge last week, and I've heard about these legends that are working there, and I don't see how they're legends.
I know, it's mad, isn't it?
I use the word very loosely.
They certainly do in the modern game.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And how's the daily blog going on Hud's View? Because people can get in touch with you on your official Facebook site, which is Alan Hudson. Blimey, it's a bit busy down there, Al.
That's the police after me now.
Makes a difference from Terry Neal.
Again, yeah. Probably driving a police car, yeah.
And on your Twitter site as well, at Alan Hudson _10. And in the next issue of Back Pass, there's going to be a feature of you in there as well.
Yeah.
And also BBC London as well, because you've recently done or recorded a programme with the radio icon that is Gary Crowley, and that's going to go out in September as well. So September's looking good for Alan Hudson. Yeah.
I hope it's as good for me as it is for Harry Kane usually.
Yeah, well, he didn't do very good in August, but he's all of a sudden started scoring in August, so let's hope it don't dry up in September for him.
Yeah, now he's struggling in September, yeah.
Yeah.
But, we'll see. You never know what's around the corner, especially with me.
Yep. And also a book that's going to be coming out possibly in the spring of next year. Griffiths Publishing and John Hellier. And we're looking to get you out on a tour as well. So things are looking up for you, the Governor. And all I can do is wish you all the very best, as always. And we'll call each other within the next couple of days.
That's great, mate.
And we will reconvene in a month's time for another episode of Hud at 50. So until then, those were the days, my friend.
Yeah, but I thought they never end as well, Paul.
Cheers, Huddy.
Cheers, mate. All the best.
Cheers,
Bye,
out. Ta-ra, mate.